Riding upon the dark crystal, Sombra licked his lips as he raced toward the falling crystal heart and baby dragon Spike. Just as he was about to catch the crystal heart, there was a streak of feathers as Princess Caden zoomed by, taking both Spike and the crystal heart out of his reach. As he looked around to see where they had gone, there was a flash of light from below him as the crystal pawnees united to banish him.
No, stop.
He called, but they gave the tyrant no heed. A wave of magic struck Sombra and shattered both the dark crystal he was on and him. He screamed in the blinding flash and was gone. With his head reeling from the blast, Sombra opened his eyes. The sun was setting on the horizon. Darkness was creeping across an unfamiliar mountain landscape.
Where am I?
Sombra asked himself, closing his eyes for a moment to let them better adjust to the dimming light. He opened his eyes again and saw one of his legs laying on the ground a little ways away from him.
Wow.
He gasped in confusion. Sombra looked around only to discover that his head was on the ground by itself, with the rest of him scattered about in pieces. Sombra yelled in frustration, then sighed and said,
I hate having to pull myself back together like this.
Rolling to his torso, he stuck to his neck and then began the process of squirming over to his limbs and tail. It was dark as Sombra finished and began looking for his armor, robes, and crown. The moon was rising and Sombra saw a glitter just ahead.
At last,
he said. He galloped to the small sparkle and stopped at the bank of a small stream. The crown was there just below the mirror-like surface of the water. Sombra grinned and cleared his mind to use his magic to retrieve his symbol of power. Nothing happened. Sombra tried again. Still nothing. Then Sombra noticed his reflection in the moonlight. His black mane was a mess, and his gray coat was smudged with dirt. The sight would have disgusted a pawnee of his status, if not for one small detail. Sombra stared, his mouth open in shock. Upon his forehead, where his magnificent red and black horn had been, was now only a white spot.
My horn.
He mumbled in disbelief.
I cannot do any powerful magic without my horn.
He whispered to himself. Panic took hold of Sombra, and he ran about frantically searching in the night for the key, using most of his dark magic. When at last the sun came up, Sombra had managed to find everything except his horn. Exasperated and exhausted, he sat down to think.
Perhaps all is not lost. If I can open my mind, I may be able to sense where my horn has gone.
Sombra said to himself, closing his eyes and clearing his mind. For a moment there was nothing, and then in his mind Sombra saw a soft glow some distance above him. Opening his eyes, he saw a light blue Pegasus pulling his horn out of a tangle in the top of a nearby tree.
Hey!
He called out.
That is mine.
The Pegasus looked down at him and it blew a raspberry at him, flying away. Sombra gave chase on the ground as best he could, until the Pegasus crossed a chasm that stopped him short. Sombra drew a deep breath to yell, and stopped when the Pegasus landed on the other side and armored unicorns walked out of some bushes. The Pegasus bowed and held out Sombra's horn, but the soldiers just took the horn and hit the Pegasus, knocking him down. The Pegasus put his hoof to his head to rub the sore spot when another soldier took a lead out of his saddlebag and secured it around the Pegasus' neck. The party then turned and began walking away.
So,
Sombra thought,
it seems there's more going on here than meets the eye. If I want my horn back, I'm going to need an ally.
Sombra looked around, and at the top of the nearest cliff mountain there was a structure. Sombra smiled and licked his lips. Black Belt climbed the sheer cliff with a small stick in his gritted teeth and avid determination. This was not the first time he had climbed the walls of Cloud Mountain to reach the now abandoned city of Cloudsdale. Black Belt closed his eyes, remembering what had happened to the city and to his friend. When the Alicorns took power, one of the first things they had done was to attack and capture the major cities of the Pegasus Pawnees. Once captured, the prisoners were taken to the Alicorn capital city, and the cities were abandoned and left to float aimlessly. And without any Pawnee to steer it, Cloudsdale had collided with the mountain and was now accessible by any earthbound Pawnee that was brave enough to challenge the mountain. Black Belt opened his eyes, his strength renewed. He would make it to the top, just as he had every year since the city had crashed into the mountain. The wind howled and whipped along the rocks, black belt's tied and short-cropped black mane and tail gave him an advantage as he climbed, although his black headband with long flowing tails did not. He would also have to clean himself after the climb, as his rust-red coat was turning gray from all the dust that was smudging it. The climb was next to impossible for most, but Black Belt was an exception. His training and special talent as a martial arts master made the two-day climb up the vertical cliff with no climbing equipment nothing more than a strenuous workout, and he was nearing the top. He would stay in Cloudsdale for a week, meditating and renewing his mind so that he could continue to fight the Alicorn Empire, according to the official public wanted list. And the government press release, Black Belt was the last free Earth pony in the Empire, and every time he managed to free somebody else, they were captured within a few weeks. But Black Belt kept fighting. He never saw what he was doing as hopeless. Black Belt kept going. He would not look down until he stood at the top, keeping his focus on his goal. He climbed for hours until at last, as the sun was beginning to set, he rose above the cloud line and beheld the fallen pillars and toppled buildings of Cloudsdale. Black Belt stood at the precipice and watched the sun set before laying down and going to sleep. The next morning, just as the sun began to rise, Black Belt was woken by the sound of hooves clopping among the ruins. He quickly took cover behind a fallen column and listened. There was the loud scraping sound of marble on marble. Something heavy was being moved along the pavement, probably one of the pillars. Black Belt flattened his ears in anger.
How dare they desecrate the city?
He thought. He peeked above the top of the pillar he was behind to see what he was up against, and saw a single large gray pony with spattered black patches on his flanked hooves and muzzle. He had a gray mane with black streaks, and wore a visor with a single red line across where his eyes would be. He was pushing a pillar away to study the ground. Black Belt took a breath and jumped into the air, coming down upon his foe in a flying sidekick. He connected with a thud on the back of his enemy's head, which sent the visor that he had been wearing off, clattering along the stone into the morning mist. Upon connecting, Black Belt pushed off, flying back through the air in the direction he had come. He landed a few yards away in a defensive martial arts pose. Instead of swaying and falling down, as Black Belt had expected, the pony before him simply turned to look at him. Ratchet was returning to Appaloosa with Namby-Pamby following her latest dragon fact-finding mission. She was finally starting to get along with a few of the less disagreeable ones, and for once neither of them had gotten roasted. Namby was rattling off all that she had learned to Ratchet, as she always did, bounding around him happily as he walked along. Although he tried to be polite to his little friend, Ratchet was distracted. Namby had grown up a lot since he first met her, and she was getting to the point where she really didn't need him much anymore. But then again, his apprentice at his repair and gear shop in Ponyville was also doing very well without him. It seemed that lately there really was nothing that he could do that was really a help to Anapani.
Namby?
He asked that in his hollow monotone and almost computer-like voice.
Yeah, Ratchet, what's up?
She asked.
When we get back to Appaloosa, I'm going to take the next stagecoach back to Ponyville.
He said. Namby stopped her bounding and looked up at him quizzically.
But I thought we were going to visit Ponyville on our way back from Manhattan after I published my book.
She said. Ratchet kept walking.
You misunderstand, Namby. I am not going with you to Manhattan.
Namby galloped to catch up to her friend.
But why not?
She asked.
Because your book has already been approved by the library, and you no longer need my help with it.
He said. Namby thought for a moment, then a smile crossed her face.
Oh, I get it. You don't want to have to deal with the crowds at my book signing, and you're worried about your shop. Is that it?
She asked.
Your query contains an error.
He said.
I do not worry about my shop. I'm going to turn it over to Clockwork.
At this, Namby stopped again, perplexed.
Do you really think that Clockwork is ready to take over the shop?
He asked.
I do.
Said Ratchet. Namby smiled and resumed her bounding.
Oh, good! That means we can take my book to all the libraries in Equestria together.
He exclaimed.
Your logic contains an error.
He said.
You no longer need my protection, and I am no longer needed in Ponyville.
At this, Namby-Pamby tripped over the root of a tree
Whoa!
and toppled to the ground in surprise. Ratchet stopped and looked down to make sure she was all right. Her soft pink wings had unfolded to reveal her darker pink underwings, and her braided pink mane with its dark pink glow lights had flipped up over her eyes. She stood up and brushed herself off.
Well, then why are you in such a rush to get to Ponyville?
She asked.
Your statement,
He said.
I know, contains an error. We're never in a rush, although you may sometimes be in a hurry.
She finished.
But why do you want to go to Ponyville if you are no longer needed?
She asked. Ratchet began walking again, and Nambi rushed to keep up.
I am going to put my affairs in order, and then I'm going to return to Appaloosa to repair the ruins on top of the Buffalo's sacred mountain.
Ratchet said.
I hate to break it to you, Ratchet, but the only thing on top of that mountain is a dead tree.
Nambi said.
The ruins are out of phase with this reality.
He said.
You are not yet psionically inclined enough to see it.
Nambi blinked.
What?
She asked. Ratchet simply shook his head. He still didn't understand how it was that magic had turned him from the construct he was, that star swirl the birded had made for a servant, into the pony that called her his friend, let alone anything at all about psionics. Ratchet had spent 1,000 years shoveling coal into a furnace after Star Swirl the bearded had run out of chores for him to do, and forgot to tell him to stop. He had remained there while Princess Luna and Princess Celestia fought and destroyed the castle. He continued to shovel day after day, year after year, while the ever-free forest grew up around the castle. He even continued to shovel when Twilight Sparkle and her friends came from time to time on Nightmare Night for fun, until that day when Pinkie Pie had discovered the secret passage into the basement where he was working. Thanks to the spell Twilight cast upon him to grant him emotions, he had learned to be a real pony and had over the course of a year transformed from a mere machine into a living pony. After a heartfelt goodbye at Appaloosa, Hamby continued on to Manhattan, and Ratchet to Ponyville. There he turned over his business to his apprentice Clockwork, and said his goodbyes to every pony but Rarity, Pinkie Pie, Delight Sparkle, Fluttershy, Rainbow Dash, and Applejack. Since they were away on business, he left them a letter. He did this because he did not want to wait for them to return. The truth was that he did not want Rarity to talk him into staying, and she was the only one that really could have convinced him. With his business concluded, Ratchet 414 returned to Appaloosa and climbed to the top of the sacred mountain, where he used his psionic abilities that he had learned from watching Pinkie Pie. He reached out with his mind and called forth the image of a ruined city built among the clouds atop a grand mountain. Then, taking a deep breath, he opened a temporary gateway between the worlds and walked in.
Oh, darling, you really must be more careful.
Rarity said to Ralph, the diamond dog whose broken paw she was wrapping.
Honestly, you do tend to push yourself far too hard.
She said, finishing her work by kissing his paw.
Can't help it.
Said Ralph in the typical growling voice of all diamond dogs.
Taskmaster says to dig quickly, so Ralph has no choice.
Rarity sighed, sadly acknowledging her friend's dilemma.
Don't worry, I will talk to Jim the Thunderbolt and see if I can't just get you a few days off.
She said.
He should be willing to. What after that last shipment of gems? I mean, there were twice what we usually get after all.
She smiled.
Thank you, Miss Rarity. Ralph not forget this kindness.
Ralph said as he left the infirmary. Rarity's smile faded as the door closed and she looked around. For once the infirmary was empty, but her heart still ached.
I don't think it's right that the Empire makes the Earth ponies, donkeys, cows, and the diamond dogs work so hard.
She said to herself.
I mean, whatever happened to working together instead of making others do all the work for you?
She asked the mirror by a wash basin. Although Rarity lived in something of a small castle with all the comforts of the Empire, she was miserable. Her lifelong dream to make fashionable clothes had been crushed for the life of a gem seeker the moment the Empire found out that she could use her magic to sense where gems were hidden. So she kept a secret room for sewing hidden in a passage behind a bookcase. Today that is where she went, as she always did when she needed a bit of cheering up. But today not even dressmaking could drive away the sadness. It was her sister's birthday, and the Gem Lord Thunderbolt had denied her request to visit home once again. In some ways, she was only a little better off than the slaves she worked with.
Someday I am going to find a way out of this mess.
She said to herself.
Then I will be able to see my family again.
Just then a doorbell rang and Rarity sighed.
Duty calls, I suppose.
She said, and headed for the front door to the castle. When she opened the door, a Pegasus messenger was waiting for her.
Begging your pardon, Lady Rarity.
She said with a proper subservient manner.
This message is from Gem Lord Thunderbolt.
Rarity took the message and opened it, saying,
What could he possibly want this time?
She read the message, which said that she was to come to the edge of the mine to speak with him by noon, and sent the messenger on her way. She then took a cloak and made the trip to the top of the mine some 200 feet above. When she got to the top, Gemlord Thunderbolt was waiting for her. He was a deep blue alicorn with a light red mane, and he liked to wear the plain bronze circlet that all of the lesser alicorns wore. Rarity bowed to him as he approached and asked,
To what do I owe the pleasure of this meeting, Lord Thunderbolt?
He walked past her without acknowledging her presence and looked out over the mine. It was a gigantic hole in the ground with a dirt road that spiraled all the way down. Rarity's castle, built in an enclave in the wall of the mine, was the halfway mark.
It seems your little hole in the ground is doing slightly better than last month.
Thunderbolt remarked.
So well, in fact, that the ruling council has decided to test you.
Rarity gaped. The council only called in unicorns for testing when they were to be made either teachers of a skill or alicorns, both of which was considered to be a great honor.
I don't quite know what to say.
She said,
You say nothing unless spoken to.
said Thunderbolt, and she grimaced.
If the council is pleased with your results, then they will be pleased with me. And if they see weakness in you, they will see weakness in me. If they see weakness in me, then you will see the bottom of the mine.
He said, turning to tower over her.
Do I make myself clear?
Rarity swallowed and whispered.
Absolutely, Your Grace.
Thunderbolt snorted.
Good.
He said, and then turned and pointed to a Pegasus-drawn chariot.
This chariot will take you to the capital city. If you do well, you will return for your possessions. If not, then they will be taken to your new home at the bottom of the mine.
He said. Rarity rose and began to walk to the chariot, but stopped and turned to ask.
Hold on, before I go, there is one question I must ask.
The Gemlord closed his eyes and raised a hoof to his head in exasperation.
What is it, Rarity?
He asked.
For all of my Diamond Dog has managed to get himself hurt, and I feel that it would be best if he could maybe take a day or two off.
She asked. Thunderbolt rolled his eyes.
Fine. Just go and don't disappoint me.
He said. Rarity bowed quickly and then trotted over to the waiting chariot, which took flight once she was aboard. Rarity was delighted by the rush of air and the magnificent view before her. They flew for some time before they came over a mountain with a cloud city run on it.
What is that?
She asked, pointing to the city.
That's what is left of Cloudsdale.
The unicorn driver said.
Left?
She asked.
I had assumed that the Empire had kept the Cloud Cities in working order.
The driver just shrugged. At that same moment, something whizzed by, leaving a rainbow-colored street. Rarity shrieked, and the driver's horn glowed as he levitated a crossbow out of its case from the side of the chariot.
Looks like we have malcontents.
He said. The rainbow streak returned, swooping in front of the driver, who fired the crossbow, which missed and cut the harness on the Pegasus that were pulling the chariot.
Jump.
He yelled as the chariot began to fall, but Rarity was too frightened to move. The driver, on the other hand, was not, and jumped onto the back of one of the Pegasus as Rarity and the chariot fell into Cloudsdale. Rainbow Clash had always looked up to her mother Rainbow Dash, and how she fought back when the alicorns took power. Clash wanted to be just like her mother. She had the rainbow mane and tail, but her coat was purple, not blue, and would often sneak out at night in a mask to do her best to make life difficult for the alicorns, especially for Cloudmaster Downpour. Clash hated the Cloudmaster and the empire he stood for. Rainbow Clash had been raised by Morning Gloria Pegasus with a milk-white coat and a golden-yellow mane and tail. She was the Cloudmaster's personal pampered pony. It was Morning Glory's job to bring Cloudmaster Downpour food or drink when he wanted it, and to keep him happy with her song while he watched the Pegasus under his command work the sky. Since by law she had the right to refuse any request that Downpour made, he, like all the other lords, made only reasonable requests, even if he did so in an uncaring way. Morning Glory had been the one to tell Rainbow Clash about her mother, even though it was directly against Downpour's orders. Because of this, Clash knew that when the alicorns took power, her mother resisted and was the last Pegasus to be captured. The rulers of the new empire were so impressed that they wanted Rainbow Dash to train other Pegasus to fight for them so that they could have a large enough army to enslave the rest of the world. Rainbow Dash had refused. But instead of putting her into prison or making her a slave, they made her an honored guest in the royal palace and even gave her a pampered pony to try to convince her to join them. The pony who waited on her day and night was named Stormy Cloud. He was Rainbow Clash's father, although he was supposed to be helping the Alicorns to convince Rainbow Dash to collaborate. He instead convinced her to start a rebellion and helped her to run an underground operation. When the Alicorns found out, however, they took Stormy Cloud and Rainbow Clash away from her mother. Clash was to be raised in a secret location. Rainbow Dash was sent to prison, and Stormy disappeared in the gem mines, lost in a tunnel collapse. Rainbow Clash had sworn that someday she would find and free her mother. But until she was old enough to strike out on her own and resurrect the rebellion, she settled for causing trouble whenever she could get the chance. Today, however, she was going to attack during the day, and she was going to make an attack on another Alicorn's territory to see just how much trouble she could cause for Cloudmaster Downpour.
Well, this is going to be easier than I thought.
She said to herself as she lined up to cross by an Alicorn chariot pulled by two Pegasus, with two unicorn riding it. Rainbow Clash dived, picking up all the speed she could so that the unicorn wouldn't be able to see her coming. Realizing a second wait, she zoomed right in front of the driver instead of in front of the Pegasus. Rainbow Clash turned for another pass.
Darn,
She said. Then she saw that one of the unicorn had drawn a crossbow and she got an idea. She rushed forward again just as before and zoomed just in front of the driver again, braking quickly. But not quite quickly enough, the unicorn fired the crossbow. The bolt flew past Clash's rear hooves and severed the harness that connected the Pegasus to the chariot.
score!
Rainbow Clash said to herself as she flew up higher to look back at her handiwork. Just like she had hoped, the driver jumped out onto the back of one of the Pegasus, but the other began to fall with the chariot.
Seriously, who stays in a falling chariot?
Clash complained to herself. Despite being a troublemaker, Rainbow Clash did not like the idea of anybody getting hurt by what she did. Clash groaned in exasperation and dove for the falling unicorn. Collateral walked into town pulling the entire load that the rock farm he worked on had to offer in a wagon twice the size of normal wagons and filled twice as high as it should have been. Collateral was the biggest bull on the farm, and he liked brown coat, and large horns would have marked him as ordinary had he been smaller. Besides his size and strength, he had one other defining characteristic: his clumsiness. Collateral had often gotten himself into trouble by being careless, and for once the whole day had gone without a single incident.
All right, Collateral. Kinda knowed as soon as I talked to the supply chief. If you can just keep yourself out of trouble till we leave, we might be able to turn a profit this season,
Said Hardcase, the rock farm's foreman. He was also the only pony on the farm to stand up for Collateral. His gray coat and his short brown mane and tail made him look even tougher than he was. Hardcase was a good pony at heart, but he was strict, particularly where Collateral was concerned.
Okay.
Said Collateral as the wagon came to a stop just in front of a construction zone where some working ponies had just stopped for lunch. Hardcase helped Collateral to unhook himself from the wagon and said,
Just sit here until I come back, and for goodness sake, don't wander off.
Collateral took a step back and sat down obediently. Unfortunately, he did not look where he was sitting. As it turned out, there was a board underneath him which had two workers sitting on the other end. The workers sailed up over Collateral across the street and into the window of the great and powerful Trixie's magic shop. Several items came hurtling out of the broken window and scattered onto the ground as a series of thuds came from inside the shop.
Oh, no.
Said Hardcase, putting his head in his hoof. Seeing the predicament of the workers, Collateral jumped up and started to gallop over to try to help. Hearing a crunch, Collateral stopped and looked down. A small broken chest lay scattered around his hoof, as well as pieces of a strange amulet, one piece holding the head of a unicorn, and another holding a wing.
Who is responsible for this outrage?
Said a voice from the door of the shop. Collateral looked up and saw a blue unicorn with a white mane and tail standing in the doorway of the shop.
I'll have you know that it is not wish to upset the great and powerful Trixie!
She said. Then she looked at Collateral and let out a shriek. Running over to him, she scooped some of the neckpiece up in her hoof and said,
Look what you've done, you big brute!
She held up the pieces.
The Alicorn amulet was supposed to be a gift for Empress Lunel herself. It's absolutely priceless. and you ruin it. Guards, guards.
She called. A band of Pegasus in armor landed around Collateral,
Whoa! It is our old friend, Collateral Damage,
said the leader.
Commerce Lord Filthy Rich is going to want to see you.
In a heartbeat, hard case was between Collateral and the leader of the guard band.
I'm in charge of Collateral, and I take responsibility for his actions,
He said. The guard shook his head.
Not this time, Hardcase. I have explicit orders from the Commerce Lord himself.
He said, handing a scroll to Hardcase, who looked it over and then sighed.
Sorry, Collateral. There's nothing I can do.
He said,
I'll be okay.
said Collateral as the guards began to escort him away. The list of offenses and accidents read before Commerce Lord Filthy Rich was extensive. Collateral stood in the court hall in chains staring at the floor. When the list reading was finished, the Alicorn Commerce Lord looked down at Collateral and asked,
Collateral Damage, do you have anything to say for yourself?
But Collateral only shook his head.
Very well then,
said Filthy Rich.
The punishment for such repeated offenses is death. And seeing as how a conventional execution might give you a chance to make yet another mess, your sentence will be carried out here and now.
Filthy Rich's horn began to glow.
You are banished to a desolate city where no pony lives, and where you cannot live.
He said. Collateral began to glow, and gasped as a bright flash blinded him for a moment, and then he was alone. The manor house rang with silence.
What is she up to now?
Midnight Bliss asked herself. Both Midnight and her sister were pamper ponies for the farm lord Applejack's manor house. Midnight knew how precarious their positions were, and she did everything she could to keep both her and her sister out of trouble. But Starlight Bliss, who loved chaos, seemed to think that the whole empire was nothing but a joke. She took every opportunity she found to cause trouble and stir things up. The only thing that Midnight found more distressing than hearing one of her sister's pranks at work was the silence that precluded them. Midnight put on her sunglasses to hide her red-slitted eyes. Her eyes were very sensitive to light, but she could see perfectly at night, and even see magical auras. Then she opened her black wings and took to the air in search of Starlight Bliss, her dark blue mane and tail whipped in the air as she searched through the rafters. But there was no sign of her sister. Midnight landed on a statue of Empress Luna and looked around. Out of the corner of her eye something moved. She turned her attention to a tapestry along the north wall of the entry hall, and there she saw it again. The flicker of a black tail with red highlights. Midnight shook her head, and then swooped down to the tapestry. It pulled back the corner, and a deep blue pony with the same colored wings and a man that had yellow highlights appeared.
Why, Midnight, how good it is to hear you, sister. I trust you slept well.
The pony said.
Save it, Starlight.
Said Midnight.
And no, you're up to something. So tell me what's going on.
Starlight made her glossed-over eyes as wide and puppy-like as she could.
Oh, such fateful words, dear sister. Why do you not trust me?
Then Starlight smiled mischievously. Midnight sighed.
Look, Starlight, this isn't a game. If our Lord Applejack catches you, it will mean demands for both of us.
She said. Starlight blinked and said nothing.
What do you hear?
Asked Midnight. She knew that although her sister was blind, she could hear so well that she could use echolocation to see even better than Starlight could at night.
It seems that our dear farmer has found my pancake surprise.
Starlight said.
I dare say I have never heard her use words like that.
She droned, changing her accent mid-sentence. Midnight looked horrified. But before she could say anything, the hallway rang with the sound of Applejack's voice.
List.
She yelled. Both sisters flew quickly and obediently straight to the Alicorn's courtroom. Applejack sat on her throne, not looking pleased in the slightest. The two landed at the base of the throne and ruled.
How am I supposed to run farms to the Empress like when I'm being harassed by my own pamper ponies?
She asked. The two remained quiet and subservient.
Now, I've warned you before, and this is the last straw. I'm gonna send you all to the mines for a few days to see if that'll straighten you out.
Applejack lowered her head a bit, and her horn began to glow with magic. Then Starlight whispered to Midnight.
Do you think I'll make it all the way?
Before Midnight could stop her, Starlight tugged on a cord, and a tomato struck the farm lord on the side of the face just as a line of light jutted out and hit the sisters. They disappeared in a flash, and Applejack yelled out.
Bliss!
Midnight Bliss and Starlight Bliss appeared together in the middle of a mist-filled ruin and looked at each other in surprise. Dark Horse sat on her throne in the antechamber before her lab. The throne was enhanced by dark magic crystals, and within a small chest underneath the throne were the elements of harmony. While she sat on the throne, she was connected to all of the alicorn pawnies which she controlled. The light Sparkle stood beside the throne, using her magic to hold a platter of goblets containing apple cider for Dark Horse, as she always did. And as always, Dark Horse could feel Twilight fighting against her control in the back of her mind. Dark Horse smiled and closed her eyes, using her magic link to check up on Empress Luna. Empress Luna was just about to raise the sun, and Dark Horse took from her mind all of the recent knowledge that she contained, and became aware of all the politics, day-to-day workings of the Empire, and all of the dreams that Luna had watched the night before. Dark Horse nodded to herself, satisfied, and was about to do likewise with all of her other alicorn. But before she could begin on another of her controlled subjects, her mind was hit by a disturbing wave. Something was wrong at the edge of her empire. Something from within the top of Cloud Mountain had sent a ripple throughout the land. It was as if someone had opened a gateway to another world. Dark Horse opened her eyes in shock. Cloud Mountain was one of the few places that her mind could not reach, and so whatever was going on there she could not see.
Something is not right,
she said. Then she looked at Twilight, who had dropped the platter and was visibly struggling now. Dark Horse realized that she had unintentionally loosened her grip on the alicorn next to her. Dark Horse lifted a hoof and hit Twilight, sending her sprawling across the paved floor. When Twilight opened her eyes, Dark Horse asked,
Twilight Sparkle, what do you think of me?
Twilight scrambled to stand up, then bowed low and said,
I love you, my mistress. I would do anything to please you. Please forgive me for spilling your drinks.
Dark Horse sat for a moment watching, but Twilight did not move.
Very well then,
she said.
Clean up your mess and fetch me some more.
Twilight rushed to obey, cleaning in a vigorous and heartfelt manner. Dark Horse called for her guards, and 12 alicorn pawnies wearing armor and carrying spears rushed in. Seeing that their magic lord was safe, they stopped and bowed.
Prepare my chariot,
said Dark Horse.
We are going for a little ride.
She smiled.